David stumbled upon a scene that sent a chill down his spine. His wife, Sarah, in hushed conversation with her former flame, Mark, inside a private clinic. The sterile scent of disinfectant hung heavy in the air, a stark contrast to the intimacy radiating between them. Mark, catching sight of David, didn't flinch. Instead, a predatory glint sparked in his eyes. "David, perfect timing," Mark said, his voice smooth, yet with an underlying edge. "Since you're here, we need you to get tested for kidney compatibility." For me. The pieces clicked into place, a sickening realization washing over David. That day he'd collapsed at home, Sarah's frantic urgency to rush him to this very clinic now made horrifying sense. It wasn't about his well-being, it was about organ matching. He was meant to be a spare part. Sarah, ever composed, stepped forward, her expression betraying nothing. "And while you're at it, David," she added, her voice as cold as the clinic's metal instruments, "let's schedule a vasectomy. We need to make sure there are no complications." "Complications?" David echoed, his voice barely a whisper. "What about my say in this? What about my body?" Sarah's gaze hardened. "This isn't about you, David. It's about Mark. He needs an heir, a legacy. You are expendable. You're just the husband in name only. Your purpose now is to be useful." The air crackled with unspoken tension as Sarah returned home later, her silence more deafening than any accusation. She tossed a document onto the coffee table, the kidney donation agreement, landing face up, its stark legal language a brutal slap in the face. It slid across the polished surface, stopping inches from David's trembling hand. "You know everything already, so I won't waste my breath," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion. "The tests are clear. You're a match. Consider it a humanitarian act, David. Unless, of course, you're a heartless monster." "My life matters too, Sarah," David finally managed to say, the words catching in his throat. "Oh, please," Sarah scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Don't be dramatic. Losing a kidney won't kill you. You'd be doing a good deed for once in your life. Why are you being so selfish?" Her voice rose with each word, escalating into a sharp reprimand. "A good deed? At the cost of my health? My body?" David retorted, his own voice rising to match hers. "And why me, Sarah? Why am I obligated to do this?" Beneath the anger, a sliver of hope flickered. He still loved Sarah, desperately. A rational explanation. A hint of remorse, anything could sway him. He needed a reason, a sign that their marriage wasn't just a hollow charade. He knew Mark was her first love, her white moonlight. But that was the past. Sarah, legally, emotionally, should be his wife now. "It's about being a man, David," Sarah declared, her tone laced with condescension. "It's about showing you're bigger than this. Donating shows magnanimity, generosity of spirit. So, if I refuse, I'm not a man," David countered, the absurdity of her logic stinging him. Sarah's patience snapped. "Oh, David, stop playing games. Let's be real. You've been unemployed for 3 years. 3 years, David. I've been supporting you, haven't I? Consider it fulfilling your marital duty. In sickness and in health, remember? I've kept you fed and clothed. Now it's time for you to be useful." Her words were like shards of ice, each one piercing deeper than the last. "And after the surgery, who do you think will be taking care of you?" "Me. All I want is for Mark to live a little longer. Is that really too much to ask?" Sarah's indignation was palpable, her eyes blazing with righteous anger at his perceived selfishness. "Where else would you find a woman as tolerant and generous as me, David? I'm only asking for one kidney. For my former boyfriend. Is that truly so difficult for you to do?" Her voice dripped with a saccharine sweetness that did nothing to mask the underlying venom. David fell silent, the weight of her words crushing him. Ever since he'd lost his job, his voice in their home had dwindled to a mere whisper. He'd become the default homemaker, the errand boy, the childminder, the all-purpose domestic servant. His unemployment was his original sin, erasing any contributions, any love, any semblance of equality in their marriage. "David," Sarah pressed, her voice hardening again, "I need your final answer. Mark's life hangs in the balance. It's in your hands." Her words painted him as a potential murderer, a villain if he dared to refuse. Hours crawled by, the tension in the house thickening with each passing minute. It was past 11 at night, and Sarah's relentless pressure hadn't eased. David, exhausted after supervising their daughter's homework and completing his endless list of household chores, felt utterly depleted. "David, are you going to sign or not?" "We're waiting," Sarah persisted, her voice sharp, impatient. And if I just don't sign? David finally asked, the question a desperate gamble, a last-ditch attempt to reclaim some control. He wasn't a saint, not by a long shot. Sarah's face contorted with cold fury. Then there's nothing left to discuss. Divorce. I get custody of Lily. I get everything. You walk away with nothing. Net zero. She turned her face away, dismissing him as if he were already gone. Nothing? This house, everything in it. I contributed to all of this. David protested, a spark of defiance igniting within him. I'm the woman, David. The weaker one. I'll need to raise Lily. Of course, I get everything. Her logic was warped, self-serving, and utterly ruthless. I can raise Lily, David countered, the thought of losing his daughter tearing at his heart. Sarah erupted in harsh laughter, the sound brittle and mocking. David, be realistic. You've been jobless for ages. Lily would starve with you. You can barely take care of yourself, let alone a child. Her words were designed to emasculate, to crush any remaining vestiges of his self-worth. Sarah's constant barbs about his unemployment were a relentless torment. Before, he'd been a programmer, earning a substantial income. Now she reveled in his downfall, comparing him unfavorably to other programmers who'd bounced back quickly, labeling him a useless failure, less than a man. Just agree to donate the kidney, David. Sarah's voice softened, a manipulative sweetness creeping back in. And I promise I won't divorce you. It was a twisted bargain, a cruel transaction. Helpless, cornered, David felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes, a raw, childlike despair rising within him in the dead of night. He couldn't bear the thought of losing Lily, his bright, 10-year-old daughter, the one constant source of light in his increasingly bleak life. Swallowing his pride, choking down the bitter taste of humiliation, he scrawled his signature on the donation form. He had caved. The next morning, the act felt like a lead weight in his stomach. He walked Lily to school, the usual cheerful chatter feeling strained, forced. Then, he went to the supermarket. Going through the motions of buying groceries, a hollow ache in his chest. Returning home around 10, he found Sarah there, eyes red-rimmed, a telltale sign. She'd been with Mark. What's wrong? David asked, the question automatic, a reflex honed by years of trying to smooth over Sarah's moods. Despite everything, a part of him still flinched at her tears. Sarah remained silent, the tears continuing to silently stream down her face. I agreed to donate the kidney, didn't I? David pressed, bewildered. What more do you want? He handed her a tissue, a gesture of ingrained habit. Sarah dabbed at her eyes, took a shaky breath, and then, with chilling composure, spoke. David, it's complicated. The doctors say the surgery is still risky. There's no guarantee that your kidney will completely restore Mark's health. Get to the point, Sarah, David urged, a knot of dread tightening in his gut. Sarah's circuitous way of speaking always preceded something unpleasant, something that would inevitably chip away at his already eroded sense of self. Okay, fine. I'll be blunt, she said, her voice hardening. In case the surgery fails, I want to give Mark a child. A living memory. David nearly dropped the eggs he was holding. Sarah wanted to have a child with Mark. Now, after everything, I want to do IVF, David, she continued, her eyes fixed on some distant point. So even if, when Mark is gone, he'll still have a part of himself in this world. A strange, almost beatific light shone in her eyes whenever she spoke of Mark. In her mind, he was flawless, a saint unjustly struck down. Their past, David knew, was a carefully curated narrative in Sarah's mind. Their breakup had been orchestrated by Sarah's parents, who disapproved of Mark. Sarah, then 28 and facing the dreaded label of spinster, had met David through a blind date and rushed into marriage. He had been the convenient choice, the rebound, the safe harbor after the storm of her lost love. Regardless of the epic romance Sarah had constructed in her head, David had always been collateral damage, an unwitting player in her personal drama. He'd done nothing wrong, yet he was the one bearing the brunt of it all. You want to have a child with him? David repeated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. Yes, Sarah said, her voice firm. And I need you to agree to it. Absolutely not, David retorted, the refusal instinctive, immediate. Donating my kidney is already a monstrous compromise. She wanted his organ and his dignity. Why are you making such a fuss? Sarah demanded, her tone laced with impatience. It's just IVF, David. Not like I'm sleeping with him. He's too sick for that anyway. And you think that makes a difference? David laughed. the sound devoid of humor, laced with bitter irony. Of course it does. It proves I'm a compassionate woman, willing to give my ex-boyfriend a child, to carry on his lineage, his bloodline. Her self-congratulatory tone was sickening. Has Mark agreed to this little scheme? David asked, his voice dangerously low. They'd clearly plotted this all out behind his back, treating him like an irrelevant obstacle. Mark agrees with everything I say, Sarah stated, her voice smug. He loves me, and I love him. You're my husband, David. You should support your wife in everything she does. Her entitlement was breathtaking, her arrogance boundless. David's anger choked him. He couldn't bring himself to make lunch. Why should he continue to play the dutiful husband, the compliant provider, when he was being systematically dismantled, piece by piece? What had he gained from this marriage, from all the sacrifices he'd made? Mark's surgery is incredibly risky, David, Sarah continued, her voice taking on a falsely reasonable tone. This is just a way to ensure he has a child, no matter what. Where's the harm in that? Why are you being so negative? You're arguing with a dying man, David. Sarah's twisted logic continued. If Mark survived, the child would be his. If Mark died, she would raise it alone. And of course, Sarah added, as if it were an afterthought, if Mark passes away, the child will still carry his name, be on his family's registry. You'll just be. But Mark isn't dead yet, Sarah. David exploded, finally losing his tenuous grip on his composure. I won't tolerate my wife having a child with another man. Not while I'm still her husband. Not while I'm still alive. I will not be a cuckold for the rest of my life. Sarah's audacity was escalating, each demand more outrageous than the last. A child with Mark? Unthinkable. I will not agree to this, Sarah, David declared, his voice ringing with newfound resolve. Oh yes, you will, Sarah countered, her voice suddenly sharp and menacing. You will agree. And why is that? David challenged, his heart pounding in his chest. Because I know your weakness, David. A cruel smile twisted Sarah's lips. David froze, his mind racing. His weakness? Lily? No, Lily was 10. She was becoming more independent, more aware. He wouldn't let Sarah use Lily against him. Then, Sarah's smile widened, becoming truly chilling. Your weakness is your mother, David. Your widowed mother, with her heart condition. The woman who's so proud of her programmer son, the one who made it big. In the city, bought a house. Imagine how she'll react when I tell her the truth, that you're a jobless layabout, a kept man, that I've been supporting you for years. Think that will make her heart skip a beat. David's blood ran cold. And that's not all, Sarah continued, her voice dripping with malice. I'll tell her about my IVF plans, about Mark's baby. Imagine her reaction to that little bombshell. She'll have a stroke, David. I guarantee it. Panic seized David. No, Sarah, don't you dare. My mother. She's not well. She can't handle that kind of shock. His mother, widowed young, had sacrificed everything to raise him and his sister. She clung to the illusion of his success, his big city life. Shattering that illusion would be devastating, potentially fatal. Don't want to worsen your mother's heart condition, do you, David? Sarah purred, sensing her victory. Then agree to my terms. Let me have Mark's baby. You can be the stepfather, your mother can be the step-grandmother. A big, happy, blended family. What's not to love? And if Mark recovers? David countered, his voice laced with bitterness. If you have a healthy baby boy with him? Tell me, Sarah, are you going to run off with him then? Divorce me, take Lily, and leave me in the dust? Am I just a disposable tool to you? Sarah's carefully constructed facade crumbled, replaced by raw fury. Her face flushed crimson, her eyes narrowed to slits. You're so cynical, David. So negative. Why? Do you always assume the worst? Mark just wants a child, a legacy. I'm giving him that. I'm still your wife, David. Why can't you trust me? What more do I have to say? Trust you, David repeated, the word hollow, meaningless. After all this, after everything you've said and done, you think I can trust you? There you go again, David. Always playing the victim. Why am I so untrustworthy? I've supported you for years. I haven't complained once. Supported me? David scoffed, incredulous. You act like you've been bankrolling me out of the goodness of your heart. I worked for 10 years, Sarah. Every paycheck, every bonus, went straight to you. The down payment on this house, my money. And since I lost my job, I've been running this household single-handedly. What exactly have I done to deserve this? The pent-up resentment, the years of swallowed insults, finally erupted. The money he'd given Sarah over the years easily amounted to over $1 million. Her support for the past 3 years was a pittance in comparison, barely covering living expenses. Who was supporting whom, really? But he was a man, and men weren't supposed to keep score in a marriage, were they? Yet, Sarah was pushing him to his breaking point. Initially, he'd thought her devotion to Mark was just misplaced loyalty, a lingering echo of first love. He'd been willing to tolerate it, to even understand it. But it was clear now. This wasn't about old flames. It was a full-blown rekindling, a reckless, all-consuming obsession that had blinded Sarah to everything and everyone else, including her own husband. Sarah had completely disregarded her vows, her marital obligations. And Mark, knowing Sarah was married, knowing the pain he was inflicting, was equally culpable. They were a pair of selfish, self-absorbed individuals, wrapped up in their own romantic fantasy, oblivious to the wreckage they were leaving in their wake. The doorbell rang, shattering the tense silence. David was surprised. Visitors were rare these days. The argument momentarily forgotten, David went to answer the door. Standing on the porch was his mother. She beamed at him, her face etched with lines of hardship and love. In one hand, she held a live chicken, its legs tied together. In the other, a plastic bottle filled with eggs. A large sack of homegrown pumpkins rested on her back. "Mom," David exclaimed, his voice thick with emotion. "What are you doing here?" He helped her inside, his heart swelling with a mixture of joy and guilt. His mother, always thinking of them, always sacrificing. His mother, spotting Sarah, immediately brightened, her face breaking into a warm, welcoming smile. She approached Sarah with open arms, like a devoted servant greeting her. Queen. Sarah had never called her mom, but his mother never seemed to mind. In her eyes, Sarah, a city girl, marrying her son, was a blessing, a prize beyond measure. "Ping ping. Dear, you're home too," his mother said, her voice filled with affection. "The harvest season is over back home, so I brought you some things." She'd traveled all this way by train, her face flushed with exhaustion. David rushed to pour her a glass of water, silently urging Sarah to at least acknowledge his mother, to offer a semblance of courtesy. Sarah, as usual, remained aloof, radiating an air of superiority. "Oh, hello," she mumbled dismissively, barely glancing at his mother. Just then, David's phone buzzed with a series of delivery notifications. Several packages from Sarah's online shopping spree were ready for pickup. Sarah, of course, needed them immediately. She couldn't possibly wait. David was expected to drop everything and retrieve her precious parcels. He asked his mother to sit down, to rest. "Mom, please relax for a bit. I'll be right back. Your son will cook you a proper meal tonight." He wanted her to stay, to feel welcomed, to experience some respite in their home. But his hopes were quickly dashed. Before his mother could even take a sip of water, Sarah, with her subtle yet unmistakable coldness, had managed to drive her away. When David returned with Sarah's packages, his mother was gone. "Where's Mom?" David asked, his voice laced with a growing sense of dread. He knew, instinctively, that Sarah was responsible. "She left," Sarah said, her tone indifferent, preoccupied with inspecting her newly arrived cosmetics. "Said she had things to do at home. I couldn't stop her." Her dismissiveness was breathtaking. His mother, a living, breathing human being, was less important to Sarah than a few $100s worth of makeup. "You drove her away, didn't you?" David accused, his voice trembling with anger. "My mother wouldn't leave like that. She left because she didn't want to cause trouble for me." She could sense the tension. People often labeled men like him, those from rural backgrounds who'd achieved professional success and married city women, as Phoenix men, implying they'd somehow risen above their station. But David knew the truth. He wasn't a phoenix. He was a provider, a doormat. He'd paid for the house, the car, everything. Sarah's family, obsessed with their city girl daughter, hadn't contributed a dime. They'd used Sarah's urban status as leverage, demanding a hefty bride price, expecting him to be eternally grateful for the privilege of marrying their daughter. He'd become their free handyman, their go-to for every favor, every chore. And for what? "David, stop being so dramatic." Sarah snapped, her voice rising. "Your mother left on her own accord. Don't blame me for everything." Another wave of indignation washed over her. "Honestly, it's probably for the best she left. Imagine if she'd realized you've been unemployed for so long, that I'm the one keeping you afloat. She would have had a heart attack on the spot." "That's still no excuse for being so rude to her," David retorted, his anger simmering. "Oh, please," Sarah scoffed. waving a dismissive hand. Once I have Mark's baby, I'll take him to your hometown, introduce him to your mother. She'll forget all about this when she sees her adorable grandson. She'll be thrilled. David's fury reached a boiling point. Her grandson? Mark's son? Was she completely delusional? Are you serious about having this baby with Mark, Sarah? David asked, his voice strained, barely controlled. This wasn't just a whim. It was a deliberate, calculated act of betrayal. It had to be stopped. A child brought into this mess would be another innocent victim. The question hung heavy in the air, unanswered. The Cold War between them stretched into the evening. David picked up Lily from school, the familiar routine feeling surreal, detached. Back home, Sarah was ostentatiously consuming prenatal vitamins, a blatant display of her intentions. Lily retreated to her room to do homework. David, his nerves frayed beyond repair, snapped. He grabbed Sarah's vitamins and hurled them into the trash can. The plastic bottle clattered against the bottom, the sound echoing in the tense silence. David, what the hell are you doing? Sarah shrieked, her eyes wide with fury. I'm done with this charade, Sarah. David roared back, his voice finally breaking free from years of suppression. I've made a promise to Mark, Sarah retorted, her voice laced with righteous indignation. And don't forget, you need to keep your emotions in check. Next month is your kidney donation surgery. Her words were like daggers, twisting in the open wound of his humiliation. If you're going through with this baby, then the kidney donation is off the table, David declared, his voice firm, resolute. He had finally reached his limit. Sarah's face contorted with rage. Fine, just like I knew it. You're a spineless coward. Mark is waiting for a life-saving organ, and you're playing games. Is this really how you want to end things? Is divorce what you truly want? She resorted to her usual tactic, threats, manipulation, emotional blackmail. Don't underestimate me, Sarah, David countered, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. I have my limits. I have my dignity. Dignity, Sarah sneered, her voice dripping with contempt. Don't make me laugh. Let's be honest, David. Even sick, Mark has more vitality than you ever did. Let's talk about performance, shall we? In bed, you're a 3-second wonder. Pathetic. I haven't experienced real pleasure since I married you. Mark, on the other hand, Sarah continued, her voice taking on a dreamy, admiring tone. Even ill can last for half an hour. That, David, is a real man. Her blatant comparison, her open adoration of Mark, was a deliberate, brutal humiliation. If Mark was so perfect, so virile, so everything, why hadn't she married him in the first place? Why inflict this pain on him, on herself, on everyone around her? So much for your undying love for Mark, David spat, his voice laced with sarcasm. If it was so strong, why didn't you elope back then? Saved us all a lot of trouble, wouldn't it? Sarah's face hardened, her eyes glinting with malice. Shifting tactics again, she leaned in, her voice dropping to a seductive whisper. Actually, David, since Mark is still capable of natural conception, maybe we should skip the expensive IVF. Think of the savings. Her words were devoid of shame, devoid of any sense of decency. She'd completely erased him, his feelings, his very existence, from her calculations. Fine, Sarah, David said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. If that's how you want it, then we're done. We're getting a divorce. Divorce? Sarah blinked, momentarily taken aback. She'd clearly assumed her threats held their usual power. You're serious? You actually want a divorce? Yes, Sarah, David affirmed, his voice clear, unwavering. I am serious. More serious than I've ever been in my life. He was done being a doormat. He was done being a tool. He was finally choosing himself. He was finally reclaiming his life. Don't forget, once we're divorced, you'll be left with absolutely nothing. Sarah's voice dripped with venomous satisfaction. Nothing it is, then. Divorce it is, David retorted, his resolve hardening with each spiteful word she uttered. Seeing him rise and start packing a bag from the closet, Sarah's smugness faltered, replaced by a flicker of disbelief. Initially, she dismissed his threats as empty posturing, a theatrical display. But as she watched him methodically fold clothes and gather his toiletries, preparing to actually walk out the door, a raw fury erupted within her. David, where do you think you're going? She shrieked, finally halting him as he reached for the doorknob. He ignored her outburst. He knelt down in front of Lily, his heart clenching at the sight of his daughter's confused and worried face. Sweetheart, he said gently, his voice thick with unshed tears, Dad has to go away for a while, a long trip for work. Maybe for a few months. You're going away? Lily's lower lip trembled. You'll stay with Mom, David continued, forcing a reassuring smile, though his own heart was breaking. She'll take good care of you. He had to believe that, for Lily's sake. Despite everything Sarah had become, Lily was her daughter too. Surely, a mother's instinct, however buried, would prevail. Lily wrapped her arms around his neck, clinging to him tightly. Don't go, Daddy, she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. David's carefully constructed composure nearly crumbled. Tears stung his eyes, but he blinked them back, unwilling to break down in front of his daughter. He stroked her hair, his voice a low murmur. Daddy needs to earn money, sweetheart. But I'll call you all the time, okay? Every single day. A promise he intended to keep, no matter what obstacles Sarah put in his way. Leaving Lily was like tearing a part of himself away, but staying in that toxic environment, enduring Sarah's relentless cruelty, was no longer an option. He had to salvage what was left of his dignity, of his life. He straightened up, took a deep breath, and walked towards the door, his suitcase in hand. He stepped out of the apartment and into the hallway, heading towards the elevator, towards the unknown. But Sarah wasn't done. He could hear her footsteps pounding behind him, relentless, determined to prevent his escape. David, she hissed, her voice sharp and desperate. She caught up to him just as he reached the elevator button. He turned, his face a mask of cold resolve. Isn't this what you wanted, Sarah? He said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. Freedom? Go be with your true loved. He wanted nothing from her, no financial settlement, no shared assets. All he craved was his freedom, his autonomy, his right to exist without being constantly demeaned and manipulated. Let her have everything. It was a small price to pay for his sanity. My lawyer will be in touch, he stated, his tone final. My suggestion is we proceed with an amicable separation. I'll sign whatever you put in front of me. But if you prefer a messy, drawn-out legal battle, I'm prepared for that too. Divorce court it is. He spoke with a chilling calmness that belied the turmoil raging within him. Beneath the icy exterior, his heart was shattered. 15 years of marriage, a shared life, a daughter, all reduced to this bitter, acrimonious ending. He'd envisioned a lifetime together, a loving family unit. But reality had been a cruel awakening. Oh, David, you've had this all planned out, haven't you? Sarah spat, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. You've been playing me all along. Playing you, David scoffed, a bitter laugh escaping his lips. Sarah, you're the one who's been playing games, manipulating, and inflicting pain. I'm simply reacting to your actions. I'm protecting myself. Protecting yourself? What about me? What about Mark? How do you think Mark will feel when he hears you've backed out of the kidney donation? He'll be devastated. He might give up entirely. Even now, facing the disintegration of her marriage, her primary concern was for Mark. That's not my problem anymore, David said, shrugging, a gesture of weary indifference. He'd exhausted his empathy, his capacity for sacrifice. Oh yes, it is your problem, Sarah shrieked, grabbing his arm, her grip surprisingly strong. You started this. You have to fix it. You have to donate the kidney. Then you can divorce me if you still want to. Her desperation was palpable, bordering on hysteria. She lunged at him, clawing at his neck, her nails digging into his skin. You're not going anywhere. You're going to listen to me. David, his patience finally snapping, violently shoved her away. Get off me, Sarah. Let go. You're hurting me, she cried, stumbling back, but lunging forward again, blocking his path to the elevator. Back off, Sarah, David warned, his voice low and dangerous. Or I'm calling the police. Don't push me. You don't want this to escalate. Trust me, a public scene is the last thing you need. He knew how much Sarah valued appearances, how fiercely she guarded her reputation. He was betting on her vanity, on her fear of social humiliation. Think about it, Sarah, he continued, pressing his advantage. Imagine the headlines. Woman forces husband to donate kidney to ex-lover. Wife demands husband accept ex-boyfriend's baby. The neighborhood gossip alone will be enough to bury you. No one will side with you on this, Sarah. No one with a shred of decency. You think I care about what people think? Sarah blustered, but her eyes betrayed her unease. Maybe not, David conceded, his voice softening slightly, though his resolve remained firm. But I do, and I'm willing to expose everything to protect myself. To protect Lily. So, make a choice, Sarah. Amicable divorce or public scandal. It's up to you. He held her gaze, unflinching, daring her to call his bluff. The mention of public scrutiny, of neighborhood gossip, had struck a nerve. Sarah's bravado wavered, the fire in her eyes dimming slightly. She finally released her grip on his arm, stepping back, though her expression remained venomous. Defeated, but still seething, Sarah watched as David turned and pressed the elevator button. The doors slid open, and he stepped inside, turning back to face her one last time. There, eyes locked for a fleeting moment, a silent battle of wills. Then, the doors closed, severing the connection, and David descended, leaving Sarah and their fractured life behind. Stepping out of the apartment building and into the bustling street, David felt a strange sense of liberation mixed with profound uncertainty. He was free, but adrift. He had no plan, no destination, just a gnawing emptiness and a suitcase filled with the remnants of his old life. He couldn't go back to his mother's. Not yet. He couldn't burden her with this messy divorce, with the truth of his unemployment and Sarah's cruelty. It would break her heart, worsen her health. He'd postponed that inevitable conversation for as long as possible. South. That's where he needed to go. Several of his former colleagues had relocated to the southern tech hubs after their layoffs, and they seemed to be thriving. He needed to find work, rebuild his career, and create a stable future for himself and Lily. Work first, then divorce. He'd earn enough to secure his independence and then send Sarah the divorce papers, a formal, legal severing of ties. Lily would be the hardest part. He'd have to be patient, earn Sarah's trust, or manipulate her if necessary, to gain access to his daughter, to bring her into his new life. Luck, or perhaps fate, was surprisingly on his side. His job search in the South proved remarkably swift. Within weeks, he'd landed a position at a joint venture company, back in his familiar role as a programmer. A steady income began to flow, easing his immediate financial anxieties and fueling his determination to reunite with Lily. Every line of code he wrote, every problem he solved, was for her future. 10 months blurred into a whirlwind of work, adjustment, and quiet longing for his daughter. His new company offered generous annual leave, and David decided to use his vacation time to return home, to see Lily, to assess the situation, and to solidify his plan to bring her and his mother to the South. He imagined Sarah had moved on, perhaps already pregnant with Mark's child, maybe even delivered it by now. The thought twisted his gut, a mixture of resentment and a strange, detached curiosity. He bought a mountain of gifts for Lily, toys, books, clothes, his arms overflowing with brightly wrapped packages. He arrived at their old apartment building, his heart pounding with anticipation and trepidation. He unlocked the door, stepping back into the space that had once been his home, his sanctuary, now a battleground of broken promises and shattered dreams. The apartment was eerily silent and empty, except in the living room, huddled on the worn sofa, sat Lily, small and alone, her eyes wide with shock and a dawning joy as she recognized him. "Daddy," she cried, scrambling off the sofa and launching herself into his arms, clinging to him as if she'd never let go. "Lily, sweetheart," David choked out, burying his face in her hair, tears finally streaming down his face. "Oh, Lily, I missed you so much, Daddy," she sobbed, her small body shaking against his. "It's so scary here alone." Alone? A cold dread washed over David. He'd called Lily regularly after leaving, but then her phone had been disconnected. He'd assumed Sarah was simply being vindictive, cutting off communication. But he looked around the apartment, his stomach churning at the sight of the squalor. Clothes were strewn everywhere, dishes piled high in the sink, the air thick with the stale, acrid smell of instant noodles. Lily looked thinner, paler, smaller than he remembered. Her clothes were rumpled and stained. "Lily," he asked gently, pulling back slightly to look into her eyes, Have you been living here by yourself?" Her silence was his answer. Her eyes welled up with fresh tears, and she nodded, a tiny, heartbreaking movement. Rage, white-hot and blinding, surged through David. Sarah, that monstrous woman. While he'd been working his fingers to the bone, picturing Lily safe and cared for, she'd abandoned their 10-year-old daughter, left her to fend for herself in this squalid, neglected apartment. All for her selfish, delusional pursuit of Mark and her twisted fantasy of a perfect romance. He wanted to find Sarah, to scream at her, to shake her until her teeth rattled, to make her understand the magnitude of her cruelty, her utter failure as a mother. Mommy only comes for a little while," Sometimes, Lily whispered, her voice barely audible. She gives me some money for noodles. She says she's busy with Uncle Mark. The innocence in her voice, the matter-of-fact acceptance of her abandonment, was like a knife twisting in David's heart. He nodded slowly, his throat tight with emotion. He hugged Lily close again, his protective instincts roaring to life. He'd failed her once, leaving her in Sarah's care. He wouldn't fail her again. Go do your homework, sweetheart, he said gently, releasing her. Daddy's going to make us a real dinner tonight. A feast. Lily, her face brightening at the prospect of a home-cooked meal, went to her room, leaving David standing in the middle of the neglected living room, his heart aching with guilt and fury. He cleaned the apartment, the anger fueling his movements, scrubbing away the grime and neglect, metaphorically cleansing the space of Sarah's toxic presence. Then, he went to the supermarket, buying fresh ingredients, determined to nourish Lily, body and soul. As Lily devoured the meal he'd prepared, her eyes shining with happiness, she reached out and took his hand. Daddy, she said softly, her voice filled with a wisdom beyond her years. Can you please not go away again? Lily knew. Children always knew more than adults gave them credit for. She understood, on some level, that her parents' marriage was broken, that her life was irrevocably changed. David's heart ached. Daddy won't go away again, sweetheart, he promised, his voice thick with emotion. Daddy's going to take you away. We're going to go live with Grandma. Just the three of us. A new start. Lily's face lit up. Grandma, she exclaimed, clapping her hands. Grandma's pancakes are the best. And her noodles. She loved his mother, her gentle grandmother, a stark contrast to the volatile and neglectful Sarah. After dinner, and after tucking Lily into bed, David knew he couldn't rest until he confronted Sarah, until he made her answer for her abandonment of their daughter. He walked into their former bedroom, now stripped bare of Sarah's belongings. It was clear she'd moved in with Mark, completely severing her ties to this place, to him, to Lily. He knew where Mark lived. Sarah had mentioned the upscale apartment complex often enough. He found the address and apartment number. With a quick online search, he had to see her, to demand answers, to ensure Lily would never again be left alone and vulnerable. He drove to Mark's apartment, his anger simmering, his resolve hardening with each mile. He found the apartment, the door number matching the one he'd found online. Just as he was about to ring the doorbell, the door opened, and a man emerged, his arm possessively draped around a woman's waist. It was Mark, and the woman clinging to him, her belly visibly swollen beneath her dress, was Sarah. Pregnant. Of course. David's gaze flickered to Sarah's stomach, a cold, sickening confirmation of her betrayal. He hadn't donated the kidney, yet Mark was still alive, still breathing, still fathering a child with David's wife, whose kidney had kept him alive. And at what cost? Their eyes met. Mark's widened in recognition, a flicker of apprehension crossing his face. Sarah, initially startled, quickly recovered, her expression hardening into a defiant sneer. David, Mark said, his voice tight, his grip on Sarah's arm tightening protectively. David, what are you doing here? Sarah demanded, her voice laced with hostility. If you've come to cause trouble. Trouble? David repeated, his voice dangerously low. You want to talk about trouble, Sarah? How about leaving our 10-year-old daughter alone and neglected for months? How about feeding her instant noodles while you're playing house with your true love? Sarah's eyes flashed with anger, but a flicker of guilt, quickly suppressed, also crossed her face. I'm pregnant, David, she declared, puffing out her chest, using her condition as a shield, as justification for her appalling behavior. If you dare to harm me, or the baby, I don't care if you're carrying triplets, Sarah, David interrupted, his voice rising. Do you have any idea what you've done? Lily is a child. She's vulnerable, and you abandoned her. You, her mother, left her to rot in that apartment while you were, what, romancing your precious Mark. She was so consumed by her selfish desires, so blinded by her infatuation with Mark, that she'd completely forgotten her responsibilities as a parent. It was unforgivable. She's my daughter, yes, Sarah retorted, her voice cold and dismissive. But she's not my child, not really. Not like this baby. She gestured possessively to her swollen belly. This child is with Mark, with my soulmate. Lily. Lily is just a reminder of my mistake, of my past life. David's blood ran cold. You actually said that out loud? He stammered, disbelief warring with disgust. You consider your own daughter a mistake? A reminder you want to erase. If you don't want her, Then say so. David roared, his control finally snapping. Tell me you don't want her, and I'll take her. I'll raise her. Just stay away from her. You're unfit to be a mother. His voice echoed in the hallway, raw with fury and pain. He lunged forward, his hand raised, intending to finally, after months of suppressed rage, strike Sarah, to inflict a fraction of the pain she'd caused. Mark stepped forward, interposing himself between David and Sarah. Get out of here, you psycho. Mark snarled, his voice surprisingly aggressive. This is my home. If you try to force your way in, I'll call the police. Trespassing. That's a felony. David's anger burned hotter. He'd never even laid eyes on this man before tonight, and already he despised him with every fiber of his being. This pathetic, sickly man, this parasite who'd slithered back into Sarah's life and destroyed everything. You think you can hide behind her skirt? David spat, his voice dripping with contempt. You think you're safe here? I'm Lily's father, and Sarah is still my wife. We are not divorced yet. This is still my family too, whether you like it or not. He was done being reasonable. He was done being passive. He was going to fight for Lily, for his daughter's future, even if it meant tearing Sarah and Mark's twisted little world apart. I'm not leaving, David declared, his voice ringing with newfound resolve. Not until I get some answers, and not until I make sure Lily is safe. Starting with you, Sarah. You are going to tell me, right now, what you plan to do about Lily. And you're going to tell me the truth, for once in your miserable life. His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken threats, with the promise of a confrontation that was only just beginning. The battle for Lily had just begun. You're trespassing. Get out, Mark yelled, his face contorted with rage and fear. He pushed David, attempting to shove him away from the doorway. Trespassing? David laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Don't forget, I'm still her husband. We're not divorced yet. You two are living in sin, committing adultery, right under my nose. I could sue you both for alienation of affection, and for contributing to the delinquency of a minor. He was bluffing, throwing legal terms around, hoping to intimidate them. But the underlying threat was real. He was ready to fight dirty if necessary. His words hit their mark. Sarah's face paled, and even Mark seemed to falter, his bravado momentarily deflating. The reality of their situation, their legal vulnerability, suddenly dawned on them. Sarah's carefully constructed fantasy of a perfect, consequence-free escape with Mark was crumbling. David, please, let's not make a scene, Sarah pleaded, her voice suddenly softer, more conciliatory. The threat of legal action, of public exposure, had finally penetrated her self-absorbed world. Come inside. Let's talk, like civilized adults. It was a transparent attempt to de-escalate, to regain control. David hesitated for a moment, suspicion warring with a sliver of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, Sarah was finally willing to be reasonable. He was thirsty, exhausted, and the thought of continuing this argument in the hallway was unappealing. Fine, he said, his voice still wary. But I'm not stupid. One wrong move. Mark, attempting to appear hospitable, gestured him inside. Of course, David. Come in. Let's have a drink. Water? Soda? His forced politeness was unsettling, almost comical in contrast to his earlier aggression. Water's fine, David said, stepping into the apartment, his senses on high alert. The apartment was expensively furnished, sterile, and soulless, reflecting Mark's wealth and, perhaps, his emotional emptiness. Mark disappeared into the kitchen, returning moments later with a glass of water, offering it to David with an overly solicitous smile. Here you go, David. Please, have a seat. Let's talk things over. David eyed the glass of water, a prickle of unease running down his spine. Mark's sudden shift in demeanor, his excessive eagerness to offer hospitality, felt off. He took the glass, pretending to take a large gulp, but subtly tilted it, letting most of the water spill onto the carpet when they weren't looking. He coughed slightly, pretending to swallow. Mark and Sarah watched him intently, their eyes fixed on him, their expressions unreadable. Too intently. So, David began, setting the glass down on a nearby table. Let's talk about Lily. And about this divorce. I'm willing to make this clean and simple. I want custody of Lily. And I want. He paused, considering his words carefully. I want what's rightfully mine. The house, the car. They were mostly paid for with my money, Sarah. The savings in your account. Those are also marital assets. I'm not going to let you walk away with everything while I'm left with nothing. He was done being a pushover. He was claiming what was due to him, and he wouldn't back down. Sarah listened, her face pale, her eyes darting between David and Mark, a strange, almost frantic energy emanating from her. She nodded slowly, too eagerly, too quickly agreeing to his demands. Yes, yes, David, of course, she said, her voice almost too sweet. Whatever you want. Let's just settle this peacefully, okay? She grabbed a pen and a piece of paper, hastily scribbling something down, pushing it towards him. David watched her, his suspicion growing. Her sudden compliance, her almost desperate eagerness to agree to his terms, didn't make sense. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. He glanced at the paper Sarah had pushed towards him. It was a hastily written agreement, outlining his demands, custody of Lily, transfer of assets, everything he'd asked for. It was too easy, far too easy. Okay, David said slowly, his eyes narrowing, his gaze fixed on Sarah and Mark. I agree, but I want this formalized. I want a legally binding agreement. We can sign it right now. Do you have a printer? Sarah nodded again, too quickly, too enthusiastically. Yes, yes, of course. Right this way. She practically dragged him towards a small office area, her movements jerky, unnatural. As he followed her, a chilling realization dawned on him. He glanced back at the glass of water he'd drunk. Mark and Sarah were watching him, there, eyes gleaming with a strange, feverish intensity. And then he heard it. Sarah's hushed whisper to Mark, just as she thought he was out of earshot. Is it working? Is he showing any signs yet? Mark's equally hushed reply sent a jolt of ice through David's veins. Not yet, but it should be soon. Are you sure it was enough? The dosage? Working? Signs. Poison. They were talking about poison. The water. The overly solicitous hospitality. The sudden, inexplicable eagerness to agree to his demands. They were trying to poison him. Right here, right now. Terror, cold and paralyzing, gripped David. He had to get out. He had to escape. But how? They were watching him, waiting for him to collapse, to succumb to their deadly concoction. He had to act fast. He had to pretend everything was normal, to lull them into a false sense of security, to buy himself time to escape. Okay, Sarah, David said, forcing a smile, his voice trembling slightly despite his best efforts. Let's print out this agreement and sign it. The sooner we get this over with, the better. He moved towards the printer, his heart pounding in his chest, his mind racing, desperately searching for a way out. As Sarah busied herself with the printer, David subtly reached into his pocket, his fingers fumbling for his phone. He had to call for help, to alert the police, to warn someone about what was happening. But how could he do it without arousing their suspicion, without triggering their attack? He pretended to cough again, bringing his hand up to his mouth, concealing his phone as he discreetly dialed 911, his thumb trembling on the screen. He put the phone to his ear, pretending to listen to something, his heart hammering against his ribs. Hello, he mumbled, his voice strained, hoping the 911 operator would pick up quickly. Hello? Can you hear me? He was buying time, stalling, praying for a miracle. Sarah turned from the printer, holding the printed agreement in her hand, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. Here you go, David, she said, her voice almost giddy with excitement. All ready to sign. Let's get this done. She was moving towards him, the agreement in one hand, a pen in the other. And behind her, Mark was also advancing, his eyes gleaming with a predatory light, a small, cruel smile twisting his lips. They were closing in. The trap was about to spring. David knew, with chilling certainty, that if he signed that agreement, if he stayed in that apartment for another minute, he wouldn't be walking out alive. He had to act. Now. Actually, Sarah, David said, his voice suddenly gaining strength, his fear transforming into a surge of adrenaline-fueled fury. There's one more thing I need to say. Sarah paused, her smile faltering slightly, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. What is it, David? Just sign the agreement. David took a step back, away from Sarah and Mark, his eyes blazing with anger and defiance. You think you can poison me and get away with it? He roared, his voice echoing through the apartment. You think I'm stupid? You think I didn't hear you? You think I didn't notice the way you were watching me drink that water? You think I didn't see the poison in your eyes? Sarah and Mark froze, their faces draining of color, their carefully constructed facade of innocence shattering into a million pieces. Their eyes widened in disbelief, in terror, as they realized they'd been exposed. Their carefully laid plan had unraveled. David knew. And now, all hell was about to break loose. Before they could react, David lunged forward, his years of pent-up rage erupting in a primal scream. He grabbed Mark, the weaker of the two, the architect of this murderous plot. First, he seized Mark's hair, yanking him off balance, and slammed him to the ground with brutal force. Mark's head cracked against the hard floor with a sickening thud. Then, David unleashed his fury. His fists rained down on Mark's face, his body, blows fueled by months of humiliation, betrayal, and the terrifying realization that his wife, the woman he'd once loved, had tried to murder him. Mark, weakened by his illness, by his transplant, was no match for David's raw, unadulterated rage. Sarah screamed, a high-pitched, hysterical shriek, backing away, her eyes wide with terror as she watched David pummel Mark into the floor. "Stop it! David! Stop! You're killing him!" David ignored her pleas, his focus solely on Mark, on the man who had conspired with Sarah to end his life. He rained down blow after blow, each punch a cathartic release of years of suppressed anger and pain. Only when Mark lay limp and moaning beneath him, his face a bloody mess, did David finally pull back, panting, his chest heaving, his body trembling with the aftermath of his violent outburst. He turned his attention to Sarah, who was cowering against the wall, her face contorted with fear and hatred. "Now it's your turn, Sarah," David growled, advancing towards her, his eyes burning with righteous fury. "You wanted me dead? You wanted to erase me from Lily's life? You wanted to hand everything over to this piece of garbage." He gestured contemptuously at the groaning, bloodied figure on the floor. Sarah whimpered, backing away further, shielding her pregnant belly with her arms. "No, David, please. I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was Mark's idea. He pressured me." She was a coward, blaming Mark now, just as she'd always blamed everyone else for her own choices. David didn't believe her for a second. He knew Sarah was just as culpable, just as malicious, just as deserving of his rage. He advanced on her, his fists clenched, his eyes promising retribution. He spent the rest of the afternoon in a brutal catharsis, unleashing years of suppressed anger and hurt on Sarah, mirroring the beating he'd inflicted on Mark, a brutal, physical manifestation of his emotional devastation. If it weren't for the thought of Lily, waiting for him at home, needing him, he might have continued until there was nothing left of their carefully constructed facade of perfection. Exhausted, bruised, and emotionally drained, David finally left Mark's apartment, leaving behind a scene of carnage and broken dreams. He went home to Lily, to the quiet solace of his daughter's presence, to the fragile hope of a new beginning. That night, fueled by adrenaline and a burning need for justice, David sat down at his computer and poured out his story, writing a raw, unfiltered account of Sarah and Mark's betrayal, their cruelty, their attempted murder, and the horrifying neglect of Lily. He posted it online, anonymously, needing to share his truth, to seek validation, to warn others about the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of seemingly perfect lives. His post went viral. Within hours, it had thousands of views, hundreds of comments, an outpouring of support and outrage. People were horrified, disgusted, and overwhelmingly sympathetic to his plight. The online outrage fueled real-world action. The police, alerted by anonymous tips and the viral post, launched an investigation. The police discovered a chilling detail during their search of Mark's apartment: a hidden room in the attic, a makeshift cold storage unit, equipped with plastic sheeting and heavy-duty tape. According to Sarah's subsequent confession, it was intended to be David's final resting place, a makeshift tomb where his body would be concealed, disposed of, erased from existence. She and Mark had meticulously planned his disappearance, his murder, believing they could simply walk away, free to pursue their twisted version of happily ever after. In court, Sarah and Mark, clad in prison jumpsuits, confessed to their crimes, their faces devoid of emotion, their voices flat and lifeless. The most poignant moment of the trial came not from David, but from the family of the kidney donor who had unknowingly given Mark a second chance at life. They were devastated, their grief compounded by the knowledge that their son's selfless act had been used to prolong the life of a man who had proven himself to be a monster. "Judge," the donor's father pleaded, his voice choked with emotion, "we cannot bear the thought of our son's kidney residing in the body of this evil man. We respectfully request that the kidney be removed and given to someone deserving, someone who will honor our son's gift." It was an unprecedented request, legally complex and ethically fraught. But the judge, moved by the family's profound grief and the sheer depravity of Mark's actions, granted their request. Mark's transplanted kidney was surgically removed and, in a twist of fate, transplanted into a young teacher who had dedicated his life to educating children in a remote mountain village. The teacher's body accepted the organ without rejection, and he made a full recovery, his life renewed, his purpose reaffirmed. Mark, stripped of his second chance, of the organ that had sustained him, applied for medical parole, but his request was denied. He became a pariah, ostracized by his neighbors, reviled by the online community, and haunted by the consequences of his own actions. He refused medical treatment, isolating himself in his apartment, and eventually succumbed to the inevitable organ rejection, dying alone and in agonizing pain, a fitting end to his depraved life. Sarah, upon hearing of Mark's death, showed no remorse, no grief, only a chilling detachment. During the trial, the shock of her arrest and the realization of her impending imprisonment had triggered a miscarriage. She lost the baby boy she'd so desperately craved, the child she'd envisioned as her salvation, her legacy. From that day forward, Sarah's mental state deteriorated rapidly. She became delusional, erratic, convinced she was being persecuted, haunted by phantom voices and visions. Sarah's parents, burdened by public shame and their daughter's horrific actions, disowned her, severing all ties. After her conviction and sentencing, Sarah was deemed mentally unfit to stand trial and was transferred to a state mental hospital, her cries echoing through the sterile corridors, her mind trapped in a labyrinth of delusion and despair. "Let me out! Let me out!" she would shriek, her voice cracking with desperation, her only coherent words a desperate plea for release from the prison of her own making. In her moments of lucidity, Sarah would call for Lily, her daughter's name a constant, haunting refrain. The hospital staff contacted David, asking if he would consider bringing Lily to visit her mother. He discussed it with Lily, leaving the decision entirely to her. Lily, despite everything, her heart still holding a flicker of compassion for the woman who had given her birth, tearfully agreed. The visit to the mental hospital was a harrowing experience. Sarah, her eyes wild and unfocused, grabbed Lily's hand, her grip surprisingly strong. But instead of maternal affection, her eyes burned with a chilling intensity, a twisted possessiveness. "He's the killer, Lily. Your father. He's the one who ruined everything. You have to leave him. Run away from him now." As she spoke, her hand darted into her pocket, emerging with a small, glinting fruit knife. She lunged towards David, her eyes fixed on him with murderous intent, the knife raised to strike. Hospital staff intervened instantly, pulling Sarah away, restraining her, and escorting her back to her room, her screams echoing behind them. Leaving the mental hospital, Lily, her face pale and tear-streaked, turned to David, her small hand gripping his tightly. "Daddy," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "Let's just pretend Mommy died. Let's just forget her. Let's just live our lives." David nodded, tears blurring his vision. He sold their old apartment, severing the last physical ties to his past. He told his mother a simplified version of the truth, sparing her the gruesome details, telling her only that Sarah had died, that she was no longer in their lives. He moved them both south, to his new city, to a new house, a new school for Lily, a new beginning for all of them. In the warmth of the southern sun, surrounded by the love of his daughter and mother, David began to heal, slowly, tentatively, piecing together the fragments of his shattered life. He didn't know if he'd ever find love again, if he'd ever be able to trust another woman after Sarah's devastating betrayal. But if love did find him again, if a good woman crossed his path, he knew, with a quiet certainty, that he would be ready. He had survived the darkness. He had emerged from the ashes, scarred but not broken. And he was ready to live again, for himself, for Lily, for the future that awaited them.